Hello, welcome to the Wildline podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today, we're going to do our normal weekend recap for the weekend of January 26th to the 28th. The numbers just came in this morning. These are estimates, of course. Actuals will come out tomorrow afternoon. So we'll walk through the top 10, and then I'll talk a little bit about the Oscar race and seeing how those films that got nominated, a lot of them expanded into more theaters. So we'll see how they are doing in their expansions. But first is the top 10. Coming in at number 1 this weekend, to no one's surprise, was Maze Runner: The Death Cure from Fox. Coming in at $23.5 million. Per theater average was about $6,200. Budget on this one was $62 million. Production budget, obviously marketing is going to be domestically probably 30 to 50 million on top of that, just to put some perspective here. So how is this for the Maze Runner movie series? Not great. So if you look at the Maze Runner Scorched Trials, which came out in September of 2015, which was the second movie, that opened at 30 and closed out at 81. Not horrific, but it's really surprising that they decided to finish it out with a third one. There was rumblings because Scorched Trials didn't do so hot that they were thinking about going direct to TV, like maybe like an HBO or a Netflix movie that would cost a lot less to promote and market. Gives a lot more access to people too, instead of paying like $15 to go to the theater, which I think was one of the issues here. It's one of those films that the people who read the books obviously want to check out, but I think they'd probably rather see it on Netflix or HBO than going out to the movie theater. And general audiences are not interested at all in this film, which is why the theatrical release doesn't make a whole lot of sense here. But they decided to finish it out with The Death Cure. The original Maze Runner came out in September 2014, opened at 32, closed out at 102. So this one's definitely opening lower. Based on the sort of falling multiplier. The original had a 3x multiplier, a little bit over that. The second one didn't even reach 3. So if I'm just assuming maybe like a 2.6x multiplier for The Death Cure, you're looking at a total of about $60 million total domestically for this film. That seems pretty low for a $60 million budget, when you sort of work in all the other marketing costs that are associated with releasing a film like this. It is rather surprising that Fox decided to put this out there, just because they were hesitant at first. It's kind of a quiet weekend. There's no other major release this weekend, so I guess it makes sense they wanted to sneak it in here, but I just don't see how it's going to break. It'll probably break even in some way, just because it has that built-in audience that will probably check it out on DVD and VOD and other platforms and stuff like that. So there's definitely that audience there. It just doesn't seem like that audience is going to be big enough for it to make enough money that it's going to be any profit whatsoever, right? It'll struggle to break even, and I think will probably come in at a loss. So it's kind of perplexing. They also waited about 2.5 years to release this one versus the last one. You would think just knock them out right away and get it done. The audience reaction to this one wasn't bad. B+ on Cinema Score. But keep in mind, it is a small audience, right? It's the people who love the book are probably going to see it opening weekend. So that's why the Cinema Score is a B+. Critics thought it wasn't that great. 44% Rotten Tomatoes. Top critics gave it 43%. Audience score was a 76, but we kind of have to take that with a grain of salt because we're not sure how accurate the audience score is on Rotten Tomatoes anymore. So I think overall, just sort of like, why would you do this? Why would you make this movie? At best, you're going to break even. You're not going to really make any money off of it. It's kind of a strange movie to put out, to be honest with you. But it was number 1, took the number 1 spot, $23.5 million. Number 2 was Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle, $16.4 million. A 16% drop. This and The Greatest Showman just will not go away. There's something about these films, and I am honestly super perplexed by. I don't know why. I'm trying to wrap my head around both of these films. The Greatest Showman makes a little bit more sense to me why it's sticking around, because musicals sometimes have that sort of repeat value to them. But are people going back to see Jumanji multiple times? Why is it dropping so low? 16% drop, lost about 150 theaters. It's still in 3,500 theaters. Per theater average in its sixth weekend is $4,600, which is great, really strong. Month and a half mark. I mean, that's great. Total gross so far is $338 million. Talked about this one at length over the last few podcasts. I don't know why it's doing so well. I don't know what it is about the Jumanji film that has captured people so much. I don't know. Maybe it's young people are seeing it multiple times. Maybe it's just like really big hit with families. I wish I had access to the post-track data, which is like demographics, who's going to see it each weekend. And it would be funny or interesting to see, you know, what is the poll here? In what group or segment is this film playing so well in that it just won't go away? But I expect, you know, there's not a ton of stuff coming out, at least next weekend, I don't think. Now I have to go check. The only thing coming out next weekend is Winchester. And then the weekend after that is when probably Jumanji will start to make its pretty steep decline, because you got a lot of movies coming out on that February 9th weekend. That's sort of getting into the Valentine's Day sort of peak or bump in the box office. So I imagine Jumanji will start to fade by then. But obviously this weekend it did very well. Next weekend I think it's going to do well as well. So Jumanji number 2, 16.4 million. Number 3, Hostels. I did not think this was going to do that well. 10.2 million for the weekend. It added, so remember it was playing limited for a while, for about 5 weeks. Yeah, 5 weeks it was playing limited. And this one is from Entertainment Studios. It's literally called Entertainment Studios. I think it's like a German company, but they're very new. They've only put out Friend Request, which was a huge flop. They also put out 47 Meters Down, which was actually a pretty significant win for them, because that was going to go, I think it was meant for straight to VOD, and somehow they finagled it. It's got Mandy Moore in it, which is like, whatever. That's it. That's all they've really put out. So kind of like B movies and horror movies. Hostels seemed a little bit more prestige for them. It's got Christian Bale. Who else is in it? Rosamund Pike, Ben Foster. I'm not really that familiar with Scott Cooper, the writer, director, and producer. He did Crazy Heart, which was a big movie in 2009, but Out of the Furnace, this last one, I don't think anybody saw. So kind of a weird company to put it out, because they're brand new. Weird sort of weird way that they released it, like limited for 5 weeks and then you push it wide. I guess they were waiting for an open weekend, maybe, or maybe they thought that it was going to get some Oscar nominations. It apparently is not good enough to get those nominations. 72% on Rotten Tomatoes from the critics, 73% audience score. Top critics, 72% as well. So not quite good enough to get that Oscar bump. But it performed okay. I mean, it wasn't a massive win. You know, if you look at this number, 10.2 million seems like a lot for a film like that. Because if you told me that 3 or 4 weeks ago, I'd be like, oh, that's pretty good for a movie. Like, I was going to assume like 3 to 6 million total box office, because it does have that. It's something about Entertainment Studios where they kind of pick directed VOD films and put them out in theaters. Hostels kind of had that feeling to it, but it ended up doing a little bit better than that. So per theater average was $3,600. Not terrible. A little bit surprising. We'll see how it holds. My guess is that it may not hold all that well. Let's see what the audience reaction was. Audiences gave it a B on Cinema Score, which is okay. For a movie like that, you definitely want to be B plus, A minus at a minimum. So a B sort of suggests that audiences didn't love it. They thought it was okay. So that's going to hurt word of mouth and legs. If it's able to stick around in theaters for a good month or so, you know, you're looking at 10.2 million on its first wide weekend here. Probably a 3x multiplier. I would say probably caps out like 30 million, maybe low 30s, which is not bad for a film like that, because I do get the feeling that it wasn't good enough to get the full release or get a big distributor like Fox Searchlight or Focus Features or something like that to put it out. So not a bad performance. A really interesting film though, and I'm more interested in the company that's putting it out than the film itself, because I'm interested to see what Entertainment Studios is up to. You know, like, are they just going to put out these films that were made for like $10-20 million that maybe were sort of meant for a direct-to-VOD audience, and trying to put them out in theaters and see how they do? It worked with 47 Meters Down. That was one of the biggest surprises of last year, to be honest with you, is to see that movie come out, which I've seen it. It's a little bit slightly better than a direct-to-VOD type film, or direct-to-DVD if you're a little bit older. But it didn't have the gloss of, say, like a Shallows, which is also a shark movie, but that was put out by Fox, I believe, or Sony, I can't remember. But it was a bigger studio. Maybe there's a strategy there to like take entertainment that maybe is sort of potboiler, like just entertaining, engaging to popular taste, but artistically isn't that great, which is sort of the bread and butter of direct-to-video, direct-to-DVD, and now direct-to-VOD. Maybe there's a place for those in the movie theater still, and I think Entertainment Studios is testing that out with movies like Hostels, which is kind of a genre piece. It's a Western, right? In any event, 10.2 million, so pretty good for that. Number 4, The Greatest Showman. I mentioned this one. 11% drop. I don't know what's going on. It's got to be the musical element here. Super strong word of mouth. People, I guess, are gushing over this film. I haven't met one single person that's actually seen this film, so I imagine it's different demographics than I'm attached to that are into it. Still in 2,600 theaters. Per theater average was $3,600 for the weekend. Total take so far for The Greatest Showman in its 6th weekend is $126 million. So I'm sure Fox is very happy with that performance. And unlike Jumanji, where I feel like in the next couple of weeks it'll have to fade pretty quickly because there's not going to be a lot of room at the multiplex for Jumanji to stick around into this like 8th weekend. Greatest Showman, I feel like, can hold on a little bit longer. I think it's just got a lower simmer to it, and it can kind of stick around in a single theater at a big multiplex for a while. So. But do keep in mind that someone brought this up on some forum this week, that Greatest Showman's actually coming out on DVD, God, I want to say like a month from now, maybe even less. So I don't know what Fox's strategy is there with its release window. It seems like they dropped it down to only 60 days. Normally it's 90 days. 90 days from a movie premieres until it's available on DVD, electric sell-through, or digital copy, if you will, or a rental VOD. For whatever reason, Fox is dropping that down to 60 days, which is strange because it's still doing so well in theaters. I don't know. Maybe there's a different way that they're looking at it than I am. It seems like you'd want to have it right out in theaters as long as you possibly can and make that money. And then, you know, for a movie like The Greatest Showman, where it plays longer and it's still doing great in its 6th weekend, I would even push the release window out to like 120 days, like add an extra month in there and, let it simmer a little bit longer. So I'm not sure what they're thinking, but that's their plan at least. So Greatest Showman was 9.5 million in number 4 slot this weekend, January 26th to the 28th. The Post coming in number 5, 8.8 million, a good 25% drop there. That's kind of what you wanted to see with a film like this. Lost 200 theaters, per theater average in its 6th weekend, but I think only 3rd as a wide release, is looking at 3,352. I sort of was critical of the performance of this film in the last couple of weeks, but now I'm looking at it, I think I see it from a different viewpoint. Its budget was high. It's not your normal prestige Oscar movie. The budget's much higher than that at 50 million. Its total gross so far in its 6th weekend is 58.5 million. And so if it has these low holds and that keeps going for the next few weeks all the way through the Oscars are a month from now. Oh, actually a little bit more than a month from now. I think it's like early March, the first weekend of March, first Sunday in March, I want to say. So it's doing pretty well. I think they wanted it to do better than this, but you can't really complain about 8.8 million in sixth weekend or third weekend of a wide release, or hitting $60 million at this point, because the drops are going to be low all the way through the Oscars. My guess is going to pull in, I can't even really venture, but at least 70, 75, maybe even the 80s. If it does that, then I think that's an okay performance. Now, I thought that it was really going to pop off into like over 100 or something like that, but doesn't look like that's on the cards for the Post. But if it wins Best Picture, or I think Spielberg's up for Best Director, then it might change the story for it. So it's an okay performance for the Post, not necessarily a negative performance like I was saying before. Number 6 was 12 Strong, and its second weekend, 8.6 million, a 45% drop, which is pretty good. Per theater average is about $2,900 for the weekend. This one's doing okay. Like I talked about last weekend in the podcast, it's a January genre movie. Just like number 7, Den of Thieves, which did 8.3, also dropped 45%. Per theater average on Den of Thieves is significantly higher than 12 Strong. I think that's because STX kept Den of Thieves, it's like a Heat knockoff movie. Kept it only on about 2,400 theaters. I don't know why STX does that. They tend to have smaller, wide releases, sub 3,000 theaters, than a big studio like Warner Brothers with 12 Strong. But Den of Thieves is doing okay. $3,400 per theater average. Took in $28 million so far. 12 Strong's at just about $29.7 million. Both strong performances for some January action movies. Number 8 was Shape of Water. 5.7 million, huge increase here. It added 1,000 theaters because of all the nominations. I believe it was the most nominated film at the Academy Awards. I want to say 13 nominations. That might be completely off the top of my head, but I think that's right. So Fox Searchlight said, hey, let's pop this thing out a lot more. Let's take advantage of this buzz we're going to get. Per theater average was an okay 3,000. Total take so far is 37.6 million for Shape of Water. This one is still perplexing to me. I just don't understand the release strategy. I feel like they're a little bit late to the party here. Just because, you talk about movies like The Post, you talk about Shape of Water or Billboards, and movies that are nominated for Academy Awards, and they want to ride that to the Oscars. The problem is the environment has changed significantly over the last few years. So right now it's really quiet. And it makes sense to pump these movies up and get some of that buzz money in there from these nominations. The issue is that starting in mid-February, we have some huge releases coming out. Black Panther, the new 50 Shades movie. I'm trying to think what else is coming out. I gotta look. But mid-February has become a really popular time to put out movies. The 1517 to Paris, the new Clint Eastwood movie. Peter Rabbit's coming out. This is all on February 9th. Then on the 16th, you have Black Panther, and then some other movies coming out in between now. Annihilation, Red Sparrow comes out right when the Oscars are, I think. But you have some big movies in between now and then. I really think the time for this to do well was in November or December, which are also very crowded times at the box office, but people are looking for Oscar bait films. Right? People are queued up to see Oscar-worthy films starting in about September. And we just sort of trained in our culture to just we know it's Oscar season. All the really good movies are going to come out at the end of the year. Trying to push it, in late January. I don't know. It just doesn't seem like the best path for me, but it's doing okay. Shape of Water did 5.7. It's that per theater average isn't very high. It's 3,000. That's not fantastic. We'll talk a little bit more about the Oscar films in a bit here. Let's finish out the top 10. Number 9 was Paddington 2, 5.5 million, 30% drop. Pretty good, even for a children's film. 30% is pretty good there. Lost 900 theaters, so it's starting to taper off. Sub 2,000 per theater average, so Paddington Bear is on its way out of the box office here. Only in its third weekend as well. Total take so far $32 million for Paddington 2. That one just did not play well here in the States. More of a UK brand and phenomena. Only 32 million in the United States, 153 million foreign. So only about 17% of its take was domestic here. So it's a more of a foreign product. Number, let's see, 10 is a movie I've never heard of before. I think it's a Bollywood film. Padmavat. That's my butchering of the pronunciation. I love that. This is like, I love seeing the industry change like this because I don't know, like I feel like for the last 5-6 years you wouldn't see an Indian Bollywood film in the top 10 of the box office in the United States. But now you're seeing, I mean, now it's cool. Like I want to see more of this, you know? So it only opened on 300 screens. Did 4.2 million. Its per theater average by far the biggest in the top 10 or any of the top 100 or whatever. $13,000 per theater. Now, is it going to stick around for long? Probably not. Movies like this that are targeted at a very specific demographic tend to pop off and then they disappear pretty quickly. But $13,000 per theater and 300 screens, that's not bad. And it, you know, blew everything else out of the water this weekend. So hopefully, I don't know, I get the feeling that these types of film like Bollywood and maybe even some Chinese productions are going to start making their way into the U.S. box office a little bit more. And they're going to start, you know, inching into the top 10 on a week by week basis. Okay, so that was the top 10. Pretty typical January, like nothing that outrageous. A lot of holdovers from the holiday still, a lot of Oscar movies, and it's basically Oscar movies, holiday holdovers, and genre pieces, and that's pretty much it at the box office right now. Which is cool. It's fun. Like, you know, Insidious is still hanging around, did 3.2 million, good genre piece. Same thing with Commuter, 3.4 million. Insidious is going to make, you know, $63 million. I mean, that's crazy. Let's talk a little bit about the Oscar stuff and see what's going on. So I talked about Shape of Water, big expansion, 1,000 screens. What also expanded? 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, added 500 theaters. Not doing so hot in the expansion. Per theater average was only $2,400. That's just not great. 12th weekend. It's been out for 3 months now, and now it should be hitting. According to the release window, it's a little bit different sometimes for limited releases, like from Fox Searchlight or whoever, like art houses. They tend to want their films to run longer in theaters. But the industry average is it's going to hit DVD soon, right? Like it's at that 90-day mark. So they're trying to squeeze a little bit more out of the theatrical. Okay, go for it. They didn't really make that much. What also expanded? I, Tonya expanded into 161 more theaters. It's on just shy of 1,000 theaters now. Did 2.9 million per theater average, was an okay 3,000 per theater. Phantom Thread also expanded a bit. 125 additional theaters in about 1,000. Did 2.9 million, similar to I, Tonya, with a $2,800 per theater average. So as you can see, there's a pattern here. Like Shape of Water, I think, did a little bit better than those films, but for the most part, these expansions don't really work. And I don't really know, you know, you think about the psychology and the business sense of doing these theatrical expansions for Oscar films. And I can see the theory of, hey, look, like winning an Oscar isn't about the money. It's about the prestige of the studio. And not only just for the masses, it's almost much more important inside the industry because it helps you get bigger directors, or maybe even harder to get directors, bigger named actors. So there's not really like a short-term gain from a lot of it. You could look at it that way. The other way, it's sort of like, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to sort of market more and push these things out more. You know, we're in a day and age where if you're interested in these types of films, you're going to know they're coming out. There's so much media and access to the trailers and forums and Reddit, and everybody's talking about these different films and Metacritic and Rotten Tomatoes, and it's all out there. So if you wanted to see something like that, you probably already knew it and saw it like 3 weeks ago. I think that's the case with like 3 Billboards, especially Phantom Thread. Like that's not a mass appeal film. I, Tonya as well. Although I thought I, Tonya could have broken out a little bit more. It's got Margot Robbie, who's like, you know, the sexiest woman alive, was what probably Maxim is saying about her right now. But huge. She's kind of like on that edge of A-list star right now. I thought that I, Tonya would do better because of that, and also because there's sort of that 90s nostalgia going on. It just did not. I don't know if Neon screwed up the marketing on that or like what they were thinking, but it just did not take off the way I thought it should. Lady Bird also expanded 500 theaters. Waste of time, to be honest with you. Only did $1,600 per theater. If you're a theater owner, you could put in a lot of things, and it's still going to do better than that. So you gotta wonder, why would I add this art feature from A24, which is a great movie, but business sense doesn't really get you a lot more business. Lady Bird expanded. Call Me by Your Name, still petering around 800 theaters. Never broke the 1,000 theater mark for Call Me by Your Name, which I still don't get. Because the reaction to Call Me by Your Name, compared to these other Oscar films, people just gush about it. And originally it was just, when it first came out, it was critics. And you listen to the way critics talked about that film, and you can tell they didn't just like it, they like fawned over it. It is very, very good. I actually rewatched it the other day. I was like, wow, like this is, the second viewing's actually a lot better than the first. Really, really good film. If you put it up against all the Oscar films, I don't know which one's Lady Bird. To me, it's like Lady Bird, Call Me by Your Name. I've seen most of them, haven't seen the post yet. But Call Me by Your Name just feels like the favorite with everybody. Is it going to win? Absolutely not, because the box office isn't there. Only did $11 million so far. Per theater average is at $1,600. It's been out for 10 weeks. Any other Oscar films? All the Money in the World didn't really get any noms besides Chris Plummer, which felt like a weird nomination. Like they threw him in here just to spite Kevin Spacey. Disaster Artist didn't really expand. James Franco, I don't know how I feel about that whole situation. I don't want to get into the politics of James Franco and the accusations that were thrown at him. But the LA Times, which is sort of like a weird... I don't know why the LA Times would get into that sort of news where it's sort of unsubstantiated accusations like that and publish them. It's more for like blogs, I feel like, or like rags like the NY Daily News or NY Post. But the Disaster Artist has been hurt by that. Like, he didn't get the Best Actor nomination like he probably should have. And the movie's not doing that great. $21 million per theater average this weekend is $1,200. So if I take a step back, Florida Project is making no money. It's been out for 17 weeks. I can't believe that the Florida Project only made $5.6 million. Like, that movie is so good. It just like, it boggles my mind that there's millions of people in this country, in Canada, that are into art films and like to see interesting, unique, rich films. Why did they not show up for the Florida Project? Maybe it was a terrible name or something like that. A24 put it out, so it was like the best indie studio right now, or distributor. And phenomenal acting. Willem Dafoe, everybody knows Willem Dafoe is a great actor. He plays a supporting part in this. It just confuses me as to how that does 5.6 million, and even something like Phantom Thread does 11, or like Three Billboards does 40, or Lady Bird does 40. Like, it just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. Okay, so what does that all mean? We talk about the Oscar stuff. So the expansions happened. None of them are making a lot of money. The best per theater average, I think, is still Shape of Water at about $3,100. So it didn't really work. You kind of have to wonder if, like, the normal people in this country, the average Joes, care about the Oscars anymore. I don't know if they do. I know anybody who's into film, even if they want to scoff at the Oscars, still pays attention 100%. And obviously within the industry, it's massive. But outside of those groups of people, I just don't feel like the average person is really into this stuff in terms of just the art house scene and what's going to be the best picture and that kind of stuff. Like, maybe they pay attention on Oscar night and they just forget about it the next day. Okay, so that's mostly it for the weekend. Like I said before, just a quick recap. You have your January genre picks that are doing well. 12 Strong, Den of Thieves, Commuter, Insidious, The Last Key, the typical January genre movies, doing pretty well. The holiday holdovers of Jumanji and The Greatest Showman are big surprises. Like you usually have one or two every holiday season into January, February that hold on. I think Hidden Figures was one last year. Really great performances from those two movies. And then we have the Oscar films, of which The Post is making the most money, which isn't that surprising because of the people involved in the production budget. But none of them really took off and made like $100 million. I don't even know if there's a single, maybe Dunkirk. Is Dunkirk up for Best Picture? I think it is. Probably the most successful one box office wise. Don't quote me on that. I gotta check all that stuff. In any event, that's the overview. In terms of summing up the Oscar race right now, if we're just talking, let's just talk about Best Picture and think about the box office. Box office then points to The Post doing pretty well because it has been decently popular at the box office. But I think there's like a cutoff for Best Picture. It's got to do about $20 million in the box office to even really get that extra boost in the voting. So I think for Best Picture, you're looking at Post, Three Billboards, and Lady Bird. I've seen most of these movies. Call Me by Your Name and Florida Project, I think, are two of the top films. I think they're both better than Billboards and Lady Bird. But because of their low box office, Call Me by Your Name is only at 11, and the Florida Project's only about 6 million. They're sort of discounted because of that, right? Like, they're just not doing well enough to get that extra boost from the voters. Okay, so that's a recap of everything that happened this weekend. Just really briefly, I'm going to talk what's coming out over the next couple of weeks. So we're getting out of the Oscar race. Those are all expanded. So now we're going to get into we're sort of ratcheting up to the Valentine's Day sort of holiday period. Winchester, a horror movie with Helen Mirren, is coming out next weekend on February 2nd. So I don't know how that one's going to do. It's been a month since the last big horror film, Insidious. That did well. Winchester looks kind of stupid. Only released on 2,300 theaters from Lionsgate. I don't know. I think it does okay. Maybe hits like 20, maybe 18, $20 million. Then after that, it gets really packed. February 9th, we have 1517 to Paris. That is the part of Clint Eastwood's series on like docu historical dramas. Like Sully is a good example of like a real world event that he then dramatizes for film. I don't know how that one's going to do. It does not look good. It looks super boring and not very interesting. And so, but I'm kind of not the demo for that film. That's more of a middle America film, like the type of people who go see American Sniper. So it could pop off because of that. It is Warner Brothers, so it's going to get probably super wide release in 3,000 theaters. I don't know. I'm kind of mixed feelings about how that one's going to do. 50 Shades Freed, finally the last 50 Shades movie, coming out on February 9th. I don't know how that one's going to do. They're such terrible films. The last one was basically unwatchable. Not like the first one was watchable, but I just imagine 50 Shades Free is horrific. It'll make a little bit of money because of the book audience, but probably not that much. Peter Rabbit's coming out the 9th. And then, the big stuff is coming. The big one on the 16th, Black Panther, which is tracking right now just over $100 million for opening weekend. Will it hit that? I don't know. I mean, Wonder Woman did 103. Spider-Man did 117 last year. Deadpool changed the rules for February, right? Did open to like 130 something. I don't know how Black Panther is going to do. There's so much back and forth online about Black Panther, and there's all these like racists who hate it because it's a black person in the lead, and then the Marvel fan people who are just obsessed with it and say it's the greatest movie ever. It's going to open to $150 million, and you're like, I can't listen to these groups of people because it's so nonsensical. I think tracking says $100 million, so I think probably $100 million is a good place to start looking at it. I think it might be a little bit shy of that. I don't know. We'll see when we get closer to it. If it does break $100 million, that's huge. Absolutely huge if it does that. And then as we get later into February, Annihilation's coming out the 23rd, and Game Night is this the one? Jason Bateman? Yeah, Rachel McAdams, Jason Bateman. Looks kind of stupid, to be honest with you. Is it rated R? That's the real question. It is. Rated R comedies are like the plague right now. They're awful. None of them can win. The single one that won last year was Girls Trip. We'll see if Game Night can turn it around. I don't think it will. Annihilation is weird. I don't know what to think about that one. It's Alex Garland who did Ex Machina 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago now, from A24. Really kind of cult classic already. People love that movie. Didn't do that much in the box office though. And this one with Natalie Portman, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Oscar Isaac, pulled over from Ex Machina. Tessa Thompson, who's fantastic. She was in Westworld. I don't know. This one has a weird feeling. I know that I heard the test audiences were not that keen on this film. It's one of the reasons that Paramount decided to go with Netflix for most of the international release. So it will premiere on Netflix, I think, right around when it gets released in the US. It's a really strange release pattern. But I think it speaks ill of the quality of the film. It does not look great, and the early buzz is not good on that. So I don't think it's going to do all that well. And then we get into March, and that's Death Wish and Red Sparrow to start off March, but I'm not going to talk about those. Anyway, guys, thanks for listening. I will be back. I'm going to finally did the best of 2017, talking about the actual movies themselves, so part 2. I'm going to post that sort of midweek after I edit it. But thanks for listening, guys. I will be back next weekend with a recap. This has been the Wildline Podcast.